Good evening, Professor Kilby. My name is Maria Yassine, and as you know, I'm in your Biotech 2320 Regulatory Environment class. And I did my project over the Orphan Drug Act of 1983. I chose the Orphan Drug Act namely because of the fact that my mother is a recent leukemia survivor, so I know firsthand um, the tremendous impact that orphan drugs and the orphan drug industry as a whole can make in a cancer patient and in other patients with other rare diseases like Crohn's disease or cystic fibrosis or Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. So that's basically why I chose to do the Orphan Drug Act. But before I start to tell you about a lot of the things that went into creating this piece of legislation, I want to give you some background as to um, prior pieces of legislation that had an influence on the Orphan Drug Act. As you know, the thalidomide tragedy occurred in the 1950s, and thalidomide, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, is this chemical that was said to cure morning sickness. Not so much. What really happened, as you know, um, is that it started to cause neuropathy and lots of other exceptionally severe birth defects in newborn children. And so there was this major outcry in the United States because of the thalidomide tragedy. And through that, Senator Cofer of Tennessee got together with Senator Harris of Arkansas, and together they created the Cofer-Harris Amendment to the 1938, I believe it was, Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And the Cofer-Harris Amendment, really, the way I understood it, was to create a standard by which new drugs would have to meet in order to prevent another tragedy like thalidomide and several others. Um, because as you know, and as you've told us several times in class, the pharmaceutical industry is more reactive than it is proactive. And so the Cofer-Harris Amendment was basically there in order to make the pharmaceutical industry more accountable and more proactive to prevent things like birth defects in newborn children and the deaths that took place in prior cases dealing with, Tylenol and several other things. And so, but what the Cofer-Harris Amendment did not intend to do was to pretty much raise costs associated with developing new medicine and researching but the particular methods and ways of correcting and treating rare diseases. So because of the economic setback that was associated in the research and development of rare diseases, these diseases, as I mentioned earlier, such as Crohn's disease, Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and Tourette's syndrome, and many, many more. All of these things were termed orphaned because no pharmaceutical company wanted to touch it because of the fact that they didn't create or generate as much revenue as other common diseases did. So every time there is no money in an industry, what does the industry do? They rear away from that and they lean more toward all of the diseases and illnesses that do have a fast return on investment and at the same time can generate more profit than would, let's say a a treatment for a rare disease would. So that is when Henry Waxman, the congressman from California, came along and said, no, we have to stop this. We have to include legislation, put it in place to where there are incentives offered for these quote-unquote orphan drugs as well. And what Congressman Waxman created in the end is known as the Orphan Drug Act of 1983. And basically, it provides incentives and facilitates the development and the treatment for medicines that can treat these rare diseases. And so and by the way, during this whole process, there was so much pressure from other pharmaceutical lobbying, and specifically from, I think, the Organization of Rare Disorders, NORD. And they really lobbied Congress hard during the production of the Orphan Drug Act in order to make sure that not only the patients were protected, but that these incentives that the government was offering was really going to help and the drug companies develop these new treatments. And so it went into the House. It went up for a vote in the House on December the 14th, 1982. And 3 days later, it went up for a voice vote in the Senate, and it was passed on December 17th. President Reagan, the then president at the time, signed it into office on January 4th, 1983, which is where the 1983, I think, comes from in the title. Only one can assume. And so basically, that's what the act is. Now, as you know, the U.S. isn't by any means hasn't stopped focusing on orphan drugs, which is why the Rare Diseases Act of 2002 came into play during the Bush administration, W. Not Sr. It was legislation proposed that amended the Public Health Service Act to establish the Office of Rare Diseases and to promote and increase national investment into disease and orphan drug research. And it also extended the incentives that were in the Orphan Drug Act of 1983 and added some more. Because as you know, the incentives of the Orphan Drug Act were something big for that time period. I mean, they provided tax incentives, and the credits from the tax incentives were worth half of the research and development costs needed to produce the orphan drug. They enhanced patent protections. They enhanced marketing rights. They gave way for clinical research subsidies, such as grants for research and development. And they created a 7-year market exclusivity for whatever drug company that came up with an FDA-approved drug. And it provided for a 15-year carry forward and 3-year carried back that could be applied in any profitable year. And one other big thing is that it provided for the creation of a government-run enterprise to engage in research and development consistent with the other pharmaceutical companies around the nation. And I know that when a lot of people hear, oh, it's an orphan drug, it's a rare disease, you'd be surprised as to what the real definition of rare disease is. Some of the most popular drugs that are marketed on television or on the radio, such as Vioxx back in the day, Botox, Provigil, Abilify, and even Cialis, which for some reason comes on TV every single time I turn on CNN, Cialis for daily use. Those drugs are surprisingly classified with FDA orphan designation. So these aren't just some drugs that are only available at MD Anderson or at other special treatment centers. These are household names. And so that's something that I found to be very cool about orphan drugs. And as you know, the actual Orphan Drug Act received international notoriety, not only here in the United States, but across the world. Everybody thought that this was a huge success. And the FDA sent out this study to where before the Orphan Drug Act was enacted, only 38 drugs were improved in the treatment of orphan diseases. Now a total of 1,129 drugs have been approved for orphan diseases, and they have been granted orphan designation by the Office of Orphan Products and Development, the OOPD. And the OOPD was also a provision established in the 2002 Act that was passed that further provides more incentives in addition to what is listed in the Orphan Drug Act of 1983. And as of last year, approximately 200 of the 7,000 designated orphan diseases have become treatable, which is great because it shows that this act really did provide incentives, and like NORD was lobbying Congress for, it actually really did result in helping people beat whatever disease that they had. So this was awesome. And since the passage of the Orphan Drug Act, the FDA has approved 353 orphan drugs and granted orphan designations to over 2,116 compounds. And so that's the patient side, but if you look at the financial aspect to it, it was a win-win situation because the revenues that have been generated from orphan drugs in the United States has reached $32.5 billion, something that nobody back in 1983 would have ever even predicted or ever even thought of reaching. And it is said by the FDA that that average is predicted to grow by 8% by the end of this year, which will put the orphan drug industry at $50 billion, which to me is absolutely amazing. And like I said, I believe that the advancement of the orphan drug industry was one of the reasons why my mother was able to beat cancer as quickly and as well as she was able to do it. So the orphan drug industry has really had a profound effect on my family in particular. And if you look at the big picture, there are still orphan drugs being developed. In fact, the Tau Therapeutics LLC, a startup company from the University of Virginia, has been granted FDA orphan drug designation for developing a treatment for pancreatic cancer, as well as BioCancel, which is an Israeli-based pharmaceutical company. They just got orphan drug designation from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services for their BC-819 drug that is aimed at treating ovarian cancer. And there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of more drugs that are being produced every single day that not only help patients out, but they promote the pharmaceutical industry and are leading to gain that 8% growth, leading to the $50 billion worth that the orphan drug industry now has today. And so in closure, I just want to tell you, I know it's already reaching my over and beyond the 5-minute limit, but I just want to tell you how much I thoroughly enjoy doing research on this Orphan Drug Act. And I really hope that you enjoy reading my essay as much as I enjoyed writing it. And I want to thank you for the opportunity of doing a video. That way I have more time to explain this stuff and I'm not so pressured to hurry up and just finish talking. So Professor Kilby, thank you so much for hearing me today, and I'll see you in class.